Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast. I'm Philip Ideson, a 20-year procurement practitioner, former head of procurement, advisor to procurement leaders around the world, and the founder and managing director of Art of Procurement. My team and I work with our global network of subject matter experts to help companies elevate procurement's impact, whether that's through building and implementing transformation programs, sustainably reducing external expenses, or leveraging AOP Mastermind, our learning and development platform for companies of all sizes. You're listening to our flagship podcast, where we pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that leading procurement teams are using to align their results with the needs of the business. Hi everybody, and welcome to this week's Art of Procurement. And for the rest of August, I'm actually taking a road trip across the United States, and so because of that, I'm out of the recording studio. So I'm going to be dipping into the archive all the way back to 2016 to share some of my favorite episodes from that year that really are just as relevant today as they were back in 2016. If you found the podcast after 2016, there's a good chance that you haven't heard these conversations yet. Today's is a conversation with former procurement practitioner Sylvain Mansotte, now the CEO and co-founder of Whispli. It's a story about procurement fraud. So as a practitioner, Sylvain received the call from the newly appointed CPO of a large Australian-based construction company to assist in the building of a new procurement function. But within 2 months, he'd actually uncovered a $20 million fraud that spanned 12 years and led to the perpetrator admitting to the crime and ultimately being sentenced to 15 years prison. Well, today's Art of Procurement is Sylvain's story. Sylvain discusses how he uncovered the fraud and the decisions he had to make in blowing the whistle. We then talk more specifically about procurement fraud in general. Sylvain shares a number of fraud red flags and provide tips on how you can ensure that you have an environment where a whistleblower feels safe in coming forward if they have information to share. Sylvain's story is really absorbing, and for me it's also a wake-up call to realize that procurement fraud is real and that any one of us in procurement may find ourselves in the same position as Sylvain did given the nature of our roles. So let's jump straight into the conversation where I ask Sylvain to share really the details of his story.
Yeah, sure. It's actually when back in 2012 when I wanted to go back into the corporate world that I got a call from the head of procurement of a very large organization based out of Australia, but that operates in pretty much every part of the world, called Leighton Contractors, and Leighton operates in mining, construction, engineering, and I got the role to help build the procurement function.
Right.
Because interestingly enough, that company was spending billions of dollars every year in buying products and services from vendors around the world, but didn't have a procurement function. It was all fragmented on projects, and so the board had a good idea about setting a procurement function. Got a head of procurement in the job. That head of procurement was then building the team, and I was employee number 5 in that procurement team. And within 2 months of working through the figures and trying to put the spend into different buckets so we could make sense of where the money was actually going. I bumped into a few of those vendors that you've got a gut feel that there's something wrong with them, and one of them was a type of B&B accommodation, which we kind of use a lot here because when your people work remotely, you need to put them in bed at night, and you just try to find a place. But that one had a strange name. The invoices were really basic, and actually before I could even see the invoices, it was the amount spent per year, which was about $2 million Australian dollars per year that we spent with that accommodation. It was a bit of a hefty cost, and so I put that one away or aside with a few others. Then rang accounts payable to go and check what was on those invoices, and the guy at the other end just picked one of them out of the system and read to me, it's that supplier, it's for consulting services for the period ending June 2012, and the amount was about $57. And so, of course, when you make the link between, a B&B or a hotel versus consulting fees, it just doesn't sound right. And so I've asked him to, read out another invoice, and they were all the same. So that's when really I got access to the ERP system to just go and see what was on those invoices. And I tracked, about 300 of them in the system back to year 2000, and it just didn't sound right. So and all the invoices were ranging from about $50,000 to $250,000.
Right.
And I decided that I will put that business number, because here in Australia we've got business numbers when you register a company with the government, and I put that into a public database, and it gave me a name, and I don't know why I just put that name into the directory of the company, and it came back up as being a GM Finance.
Wow.
And that's when actually I think my whole world stopped for a while. I guess, because I knew that potentially I was onto something. But the interesting thing about being a whistleblower, even though at that time I didn't know I was a whistleblower, I was just crunching numbers and looking at information like you do every day when you're in procurement. And but it just, the link of having that name behind the company and the company billing us for something that I thought was a bit dodgy, you just start to panic because you believe that you must be wrong. That employee was with Leighton for 30 years, and he was committing that crime. If he was, really a fraud, he was committing that crime for well over 12 years. So the first thing that you realize is that actually, yes, it just can't happen. You've been in that business for 2 months. You're still on probation. Your wife is expecting baby number 3. It just can't happen. So it took me about 4 hours to actually try to convince myself that I was wrong. I was going through the invoice, going through all the data that I had, and just trying to convince myself that, because at least 50 to 100 people saw exactly what I saw in the system, and no one said nothing. So obviously I must be wrong. And that's the worst thing to an individual is actually, you pick up something that is suspicious, and you're not comfortable in talking about it because your brain is actually your worst enemy is playing against you.
Yeah, and the gut feel though, you probably knew that this was true.
Correct.
You're kind of trying to convince yourself otherwise, but you really knew that it was.
And that's why the human brain is built in such a way that it could be your best ally and your worst enemy. And in that case, it was both, and they were fighting with each other. So and that's why it took me a good part of half a day to go to the next step, which was okay. So now I believe this is wrongdoing. I'm being a good person. I want to be able to raise that to someone that can verify the facts. And so I went onto the intranet of the organization, which, by the way, I was quite lucky because when you work in this type of organization, most of the employees just don't have access to the intranet because they're digging a hole, on a mining site or they're on a construction site, but they're not sitting in an office. And again, it took me a good part of 30 minutes to find out whether or not the organization had subscribed to one of those whistleblower platform or third-party provider of whistleblowing services. And luckily, Leighton did at the time, which is a good thing. And I had 5 different channels that I could use. One was the hotline, the phone. Another one was a form on the internet. I had a fax. To be honest, I'm just over 39 years old now, and I never used a fax in my entire life.
I'm with you there.
Yeah, I had access to a PO box, so I could send mail through it, and I had access to an email address. But all those channels were actually either not anonymous or didn't have the two-way communication. So if you put something in the mail, you can't communicate with with whoever is going to receive that mail. If you do it by fax, it's going to be the same thing. And then the other system, like the hotline. Being French by background, I can tell you there was not that many froggies around at Leighton, so it was quite easy to pick up my accent. So I didn't feel comfortable in calling anyone. Same thing with the email address or the form on the internet. They could have tracked my IP address. And again, it's all about that first message. You think you picked up something, but you're not sure, even though you're sure. So you want to tell someone, but you don't necessarily want to expose yourself because if for whatever reason you're wrong, then one, you look stupid, And two, it's highly likely that your job is going to stop one day or another because what you've picked up was actually not fraud. So it's all that ambiguity around suspecting wrongdoings and how do you report it while remaining in a safe position.
Yeah, it's like you want the company to find that you're actually wrong. Because you don't want this to be the truth, and like you say, the moment that you put your name to it, then that has all kinds of unintended consequences, I'm sure, within the organization, particularly if it turns out that you have missed something, and even if you haven't.
Correct, because then you lose credibility, and because I didn't have the time in 2 months to build credibility anyway, that's the only image that people would have had from me. So it's really, really difficult. And the other factor in there is the fact that you're dealing with a human being on the other end. So accusing someone who is very well known in the organization of, taking well over $20 million of company money. This was then the largest fraud in Queensland, which is one of the states in Australia. And so it was potentially really, really big. And I knew that person, had a wife and daughter. Right. So potentially, if that was correct, I would damage someone's life. Yeah. And that was really, really hard on me on, whether or not I was doing the right thing to report it. But you know what, there's it's all that dilemma when you're I don't like the word whistleblower, but that's what I was, I guess, at the time. But when you want to do the right thing, it should be business as usual, but it's not, and it will never be, because you've got that brain that you have to fight with. You've got that human factor in interaction with people, and you don't want to harm people, but you still want to do the right thing and report what you suspect is wrong.
Yeah, despite the fact that to a lot of people, the easy option is to just turn a blind eye, and in the grand scheme of things, that amount of money, while a lot of money, isn't going to, I'm sure, bankrupt the company, because you're still talking about a big company. So it'd be easier to say nothing, and it's probably not uncovered again, because until somebody else is doing, or maybe never. But you can't do that with a conscience either, so you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Correct. And $20 odd million for that organization was pocket money. Mm-hmm. But for any individual, it's a lot of money. Right. And the fact that he was doing something wrong. But when you talk about people that would turn a blind eye, I think there's actually several type of individuals in an organization. You've got the one that will see or suspect something is wrong, but they've got that fear that is preventing them from reporting it, and so they will keep going, to work every day. They'll just lose their motivation, but they'll, stick to their job and do their day job and go home, but they're not going to give the best of themselves. And that's a bit sad for, both parties, because nobody's winning. You've got the one that think, what, if everybody is doing it, then why not me? And then they'll put their finger in the pie as well. And I've seen that a lot, unfortunately. You've got the one that just can't stand it, but they still can't report it because of that fear of losing your credibility, losing your job, and then they leave the business and they go to another company, and then ultimately you've got the one that will report it, and I fell into that last category, I guess.
So what happened then after you reported it? And did you report it anonymously then through the hotline, and then they basically verified the information?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I didn't use the whistleblowing platform that was in place at the time, even though it was costing an arm and a leg to the organization. And I didn't use it for the reason I mentioned before, which was the fact that I would not be either anonymous, or I wouldn't have the opportunity to have that two-way communication. Yeah. And I did something that I would recommend everybody else not to do, which is actually to talk to my manager. Right. And the reason why I say, don't talk to your manager is because I didn't know who was part of that fraud scheme. I hadn't.
Yeah, who's complicit?
Correct. There could have been, 5, 10, 15 people behind, depending on everybody's interest. You don't know if they want to protect you or not. And again, if I was wrong, I guess my boss would have, gone to the conclusion that Sylvain was maybe not good enough for the team, and she would have terminated my employment contract. But in that case, the reason why I went to my manager is because she was new as well. She had been with the company for 5 months. She was brought in to set up that procurement function. And she was a bit of a shark, and still is actually. She's now running the procurement function for the largest supermarket chain here in Australia. And so I went to that lady and just show her the invoices and told her that the story. And within 5 minutes, she knew that this was fraud. And she went up to the office of the CFO, who himself went to the office of the managing director of Leighton. And that's how everything, unfolded at the time. The next day, the employee was interviewed, and he's what we call a likable fraudster. So you've got two categories of fraudsters. You've got the likable fraudsters, and you've got the arrogant fraudster.
Right.
And the likable fraudster, of those guys, is they will tell you everything within 5 minutes. So he acknowledged that, money from the company. He will tell you exactly how much of it. He would tell you where the money was gone. But unfortunately, with likable fraudsters, there's usually not much money left because they would spend it in, call girls and prostitutes. Right. And in his case, it was also race. So everything is wasted. And to the opposite, you've got the arrogant fraudster that will deny everything for days, if not weeks or months. And but the beauty of those guys is they're usually really good at investing the money. So they will buy assets somewhere, so you can always recover most of it. But mine was just a likable fraudster, so we couldn't recover much of the money that it took from the company, unfortunately. And so at the time, so he was arrested and put behind bars and sentenced to just over 10 years of prison, which could be considered as being a lot or maybe not enough. It depends how you look at things. Right. But when you look at the CFO of Enron, for instance, only did 6 years behind bars in the US. So and the collapse of Enron was $74 billion. So when you compare things, I always say maybe it's better to be a fraudster in the US than in Australia.
Right. What were some of the lessons then that you took from this entire experience? Because it's a pretty harrowing experience. It's something that you don't go to work thinking you're going to uncover this. And, the moment, like you say, the moment you realize you've uncovered it, it's kind of your whole world changes.
Correct. And it's interesting because nobody thinks that, you're going to be a whistleblower one day.
Right.
It just doesn't happen that way. It took me, weeks to actually realize what I did. Because what was on my mind at the time was the impact that this would have on that person's life. The fact that, he would lose his wife and daughter for many, many years. So it was all the things that I did which I actually thought were wrong. So I never thought about I did the right thing by reporting someone that, was stealing money from the company. I thought about the consequence of my actions, which was putting someone behind bars and having a broken family and friends and all of that. So it's all that impacts your brain every day. But interestingly enough, the organization came back to me a few days after I blew the whistle, asking if I wanted to move from procurement to risk management / investigation to see if I could help and clean up the mess if there was anything else happening within the business. And I said yes, of course, I'm happy to do that. Not sure what you're talking about, but I'll do it. And the beauty of working in an organization that's around mining and construction and engineering is wrongdoing is pretty much everywhere. But most people don't even have knowledge of that what they're doing is actually wrongdoing.
Yeah.
And I managed about investigations over a period of just over 2 years. And every time I was able to pinpoint to a potential informant or whistleblower, those individuals were always telling me the same thing, which is, I fear for myself, my job, and my family, and I'm not going to speak up. And I can't blame any of them for that because I was in their shoes a few months before. Really, really tough. So, what my takeaway of that was to say there's a lot of stuff happening in any organization around the world, but most people aren't aware of it because their best asset, which are their employees, don't have the strength to speak up, and that's quite sad in a way. And procurement, is one very specific area in an organization where it's quite easy to commit a crime, whether it's bid rigging or collusion or any type of corruption, because most of the dealings can happen outside of any system. And a lot of organizations think that they can trust their people and that they've got good employees and that fraud and corruption always happen next door, but actually it happens everywhere. And that's the sad thing about the human being is some of us unfortunately can get greedy, and you work in procurement. You've got suppliers that want to sell you their product because they need to hit their targets, and sometimes they just do the wrong thing to make you buy those products and services.
If you're somebody who never has any of those thoughts whatsoever, you think that this doesn't go on. I would think that this doesn't really go on at the scale that it obviously does go on, and maybe you're naive about it.
Right, but it's all about. I think as human beings, we're a bit naive sometimes, and we just like to think that we live in a perfect world.
Right.
And I think it should be for most of the thing we do, but it doesn't prevent us from being aware of the red flags. So I guess that's really one of the key takeaway from my experience. The whistleblower is, I was one of those individuals that, yes, I thought everything was running smoothly and people were dedicated to their job, and actually there was a few dodgy individuals in there. Luckily, it's only a fragment of the organization that's not committed to deliver the outcome that everybody expects, and that want to take something away from the organization, whether it's money, whether it's assets, whether it's relationship or whatever. And really, it's important for any employee, and mostly in procurement, to understand how to pick up the red flags,
right.
What to look for when you're dealing with procurement function, because it will happen that one day or another you're going to be facing with a situation where either yourself will be asked to do something that's maybe a bit borderline, or maybe you will observe someone else doing something that's outside of that framework that you're meant to operate into. So the first thing that we did after the event in my organization was, of course, to bring some forensic accountants and see how we could close those gaps in our segregation of duties, in our policies and guidelines, to make sure that people knew exactly what they could do and couldn't do. And I always say to when I present or when I speak to some events, it's important that the first thing that you have a strong tone at the top. This is the first thing that employees look for, is the tone at the top. If you've got strong management that walk the talk, that tells you when you're on board the organization that you need to go through a process where you're going to have to review maybe your code of conduct, maybe your whistleblowing policy, get maybe an online testing on it to make sure that you understand, what you can do and what you can't do. In procurement, you tend to have a procurement card sometime because you go out for lunch with suppliers or buying products and services, and it's important that you know how to use those cards, because maybe it's okay to spend $20 on a lunch, maybe it's not okay to spend $300 on a lunch. And then if you buy lunch, can you buy a bottle of wine or not? And if you can, what can you buy? What dollar value, the monetary value of that bottle of wine? Because if you don't put the framework in place, then employees will tend to take advantage of that and say, there's no limit in there. I can maybe increase the spend a bit more. I've seen people buying, personal products for on their corporate card. And when I say, it's not small amounts. The audit I did back in 2014 in an organization picked up $1.4 million of items that were for personal use across the workforce that had access to a corporate card. So, there might be $30 here and $50 there, but it adds up a lot. So it's all about making sure that your employees understand the rules of the game and the framework in which they operate into, and making sure also that the manager verify the expenses, verify had regular meetings with their colleagues, maybe go and attend some supplier meetings, make sure that everything is running smoothly. You trust people, but you have to verify also that people are doing the right thing.
Right. And it's not even necessarily about a monetary value, is it? It's just the action. So, you said some people may put $30 or $50 on their card, but even putting $30 or $50 on the card is the same action as racking up a bill of $1.5 million. You're still taking from the company something that, isn't yours.
Exactly. And I've noticed something is when people start, whatever the amount might be, and they say it could be $20, and they can get away with it, they will start again.
Yeah.
Because if I did it and no one picked it up, then it means it's okay, I can do it again. And the issue is you tend to gradually increase the frequency and also the value of whatever you're taking away from the business. And that is really, really dangerous, because it creates that perception that actually it's okay to do it. It's not damaging the company. I can get away with it. I'm spending long hours at work, and some type of reward.
I deserve it.
Employees will always use to get around the system.
Yeah, and I guess it just compounds itself then. So you get away with more, you take more, you get away with even more, and before you know it, the employee is at a point where they're in so deep that the numbers almost don't matter anymore.
Correct, exactly. And in fraud, there's a theory around what they call the fraud triangle, and in the fraud triangle, you've got three elements that will always be or that you can always relate to when you pick up a fraud. One of them is the pressure. So it could be financial pressure that I need to pay off the bill. I need somewhere. I need to increase my income. So you've got that pressure element. The other one is the opportunity. So I can go around the system, send a fake invoice, or increase or do a deal with a vendor, so I can get some sort of compensation for doing that deal with a vendor, or I can buy some stuff on my corporate card, and I've got an opportunity to do that. And the third element is the rationale, and the rationale is in the case of the fraud I uncovered, it was that actually the employee was looking at the managing director of the organization, who also started 30 years before, and he was thinking, I'm putting a lot of effort in that business as the managing director was doing, but my salary is like 10 times lower than the managing director. And something wrong in there. I should, the rationale for him was to say, I should earn at least the same amount as that guy because I deserve it. I spend long hours and I'm dedicated to the business. And so for him, he had like an excuse, which was to say, I can do it because I deserve it. And again, it's not damaging the organization if I still, $2 million on top of my salary every year. So you always find those three elements: the pressure, the opportunity, and the rationalization in any fraud case. So again, that's something that employees can pick up as red flags when they do work every day. They can pick up those things about maybe an employee that goes and gamble, every night. Where is the money coming from?
Right.
Or sometimes it could be someone turning in, a new car every 3 months or something like this. So just be aware of those red flags of people, spending all their days from 7 o'clock in the morning to 10 p.m. at night in the office, never go on leave. I've been in their role for many years. I'm not saying they're all dodgy, but sometimes, it's just one of those red flags. It's not good for a company when an employee is there 24/7, never takes leave, and always in the same role for many years. So, people should be aware of that.
So how, as a company, can you encourage a whistleblower to come forward? You talked about the fact that Leighton had all these controls in place, or they had these opportunities, these avenues for you to go to, but you still didn't feel comfortable. They probably thought they were doing the right thing. The reality is that as an employee, you still didn't feel that those offered you the protection that you needed. So what can a company really do?
So again, I think it all goes back to first the turn at the top, the fact that people talk openly about potential problems in the organization. So an organization should not bury their head in the sand, thinking that they can trust everyone and we live in a perfect world. So they should be aware of that. They should communicate to their people. They should have a code of conduct and a whistleblowing policy that explains what is the expectation of everyone when you're at work or outside of work actually, and you pick up something that might be suspected as wrongdoing, and being open about it. So a lot of organizations actually have that on paper, but it just sits there on the internet and they never ever talk about it to employees. So it should be from your first day in the office to maybe a refresher every 3 months. Some internal communication every now and then, whether it's on posters or whether it's something sent by email from the board of the organization, explaining why it's important for people to report suspecting wrongdoing. It's not different to reporting something like a suggestion or an improvement.
Right.
If you can make this part of being business as usual, then more people are going to be comfortable in dealing in that environment and submitting information. Now, there's something that triggers in yourself when you actually have to blow the whistle, and it's what I was talking about previously. Is that fear factor? Is the fact that whenever you have to report something, that first message is really, really difficult because you just don't know what is going to be the response. And then I think the only option we've got is to enable employees to report anonymously. Protecting the anonymity of an individual enables two things. One is to separate yourself from the situation. If you report something about your colleague at work, then you've got that relationship between yourself and the colleague, and everything in your brain is going to make you think that you shouldn't be doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you can put yourself from the situation and anonymize yourself, and then it's a lot easier, because it's not your colleague doing the wrong thing. It's an individual within the organization or outside the organization doing the wrong thing. And that changes everything, because you can now separate yourself from the situation and also remove that fear of, what if I'm wrong? What if actually it's not, wrongdoings or fraud? And the world is moving that way, and luckily, technology is helping in doing that, where you can enable an anonymous two-way communication where people don't have that fear factor anymore.
So if a listener was to come across a procurement fraud, would you recommend a minimum standard of evidence, for example, that they pull together before they essentially at least report what their fears are, what they found?
Yeah, I think it's all about putting aside all the evidence that you find in the system, or it could be an email, it could be a purchase order or an invoice, whatever you've got. But always when you report something, you're not coming along and saying, "Oh no, I picked up a fraud and this is it." It's more about, I just was doing my work and I came along that piece of information, and I suspect there could be something in it. Do you mind helping me having a look into it? It's not running to conclusion, because it will happen that in most instances it might not be fraud or corruption. So, but again, as an employee, it's your role to be aware of what can happen in the business or outside of the business, and if you suspect some wrongdoing, then it's also your role to report it. So it's always to frame it where, one, you don't accuse anyone, and two, you come up with facts, and not just words, because words are worth nothing, but just with facts. And then, you just present the facts and saying, do you mind helping me going through those facts and see if that's okay or not?
And I guess that's a way of protecting your role at the company too, post reporting what you've found, what you've come across, because that is always going to be at the back of your mind, even though you want to do the right thing, is how is this going to impact me? And what effect is that going to be on my role in the organization?
Exactly. And, the main question that will go into someone's mind when they think they picked up something is, what if I'm wrong? Mm-hmm. And should I be the one to report it? Or will I lose my job? Who can I rely on? Who else might be involved? Can I remain anonymous? Who do I talk to? What's the reporting process? All those things that goes into your mind in a millisecond and makes you panic. So the whole idea is, okay, let's frame it in a way that, it's just something that's there. It's something I've got a question about, and I just want to build a case and bring that case to the attention of management in a way that is not accusing anyone, just a way of saying, listen, I went through that process. I thought there was maybe something in there that I don't quite understand. Do you mind, helping me with it?
What's a fascinating story, and I'm kind of riveted by all the details of it. So thank you so much for sharing it with me, and also, kind of the experiences that's. I think it's shaped what you've done in terms of the product that you've built at Whispli as well, post your experiences. And I just had a final question as we begin to wrap up. There's going to be fear. I know if I came across this, the first thing is going to be fear, because you start thinking about your family as opposed to doing the right thing necessarily. So what would you say to people who feel that it really just isn't worth the hassle, and that they'd rather just keep quiet than really reporting any potential fraud that they may come across?
So this is a tough question, because again, all the investigation that I ran in that organization, and whenever I was able to pinpoint a potential informant, and all of them said, I don't feel comfortable in coming forward. Mm-hmm. I can't blame them, because I know how challenging it is. So I'm not really here to tell what people should be doing, because we're all different. I'm just what I can do is help organizations to understand what they can do to brief their people, to make them feel comfortable, to enable them with some tools that actually, are going to protect themselves, whether because they're, anonymous reporting channels, or because they've got those maybe tool shops or workshops where they can openly talk, with each other and raise potential red flags. But as an individual, we're all different and very different. Yeah. And we know that the potential is going to have a dramatic impact on us. I always say to myself that I was one of those lucky ones, because I didn't get fired. I didn't get vilified. Yes, I got a promotion, didn't get the pay rise, but that was okay. I was able to learn, a new job. by becoming a risk manager / investigator, I was also able to, nurture an idea in the back of my mind. It took me actually 2 years to realize that, I could come up with some piece of technology and software to enable that anonymous two-way communication.
Yeah.
It took me another, few months to realize that actually this could be applied to other part of life, like, our kids at school where they get bullied or they see drugs and violence around them and they don't like to talk. They don't report it to the principal of the school or the counselor. And we can actually enable those kids, because they all like to chat, we can enable them to report things anonymously and having a two-way communication with the counselor or the principal of the school and helping them dealing with their problems. And that's how I came up to, develop other solutions for domestic violence, schools, law enforcement authorities, and so on and so forth. So for me, it was what happened to me was a blessing. It helped me grow myself, but I always relate to that event. And even though it happened, 4 years ago, nearly to the day, with me pretty much every day because it's something that changed my life.
Subscribe to our regular newsletter, the AOP Insider, and never miss an episode of the podcast. Go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe, and you can find our back catalogue from the past 5 years at artofprocurement.com.